back to the Banderpod, the gnomish and knowledgeable podcast of Bandersnatch books. We're a small press publisher of treasures found off the beaten path for lovers of all that is good, true, and beautiful. I'm Annie Beth Donahue, and today I'm talking with Ken Priebe about the light as a protest against the darkness. Ken, welcome to the Banderpod.
Hello, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
All right, so as Ken has a book published through Bandersnatch Books called Goblabet,
hmm
and it's an alphabetical murder mystery with goblins. Well, I'm going to start off with something kind of easy. I'll softball it to you. Would
Yes,
you please talk to us a little bit about maybe the construction behind Goblabet? Maybe even after you talk about that, what the process was like working with Bandersnatch Books?
sure. Well, I had somehow come up with this concept of doing an alphabet book and putting goblins in it and making it, crafting it into sort of a murder mystery of sorts. A friend had sent me a copy of this book called The 11th Hour by Graham Base, which is a book that kind of has a mystery woven within the illustrations, and you have to kind of look for things in the drawings and figure this out. So I think that kind of started this whole idea of, oh, what if you had a book that was also had a puzzle inside and you had to figure out what the puzzle is. And other than that, I don't really know where the idea came from, other than I sort of got involved with some goblin associates. It's a very dangerous thing to work with goblins. They are not always kind. You have to, sign many contracts and really keep your guard up because goblins can be dangerous. But somehow or another, this idea kind of came about of putting together a series of having a goblabet for each letter of the alphabet. So 26 goblins. They're all on trial because the king of the goblins has been murdered. And if the king of goblins or goblin king sounds familiar, it's because a lot of the inspiration for the idea also came from my deep love for the art of Brian Froud, who was the concept artist behind Jim Henson's Labyrinth and The Dark Crystal,
Oh,
two
yeah.
movies that changed my life as a kid and which I still am absolutely obsessed with to this day. And so that has a lot to do with where my love for goblins comes from and my willingness to work with them, as dangerous as they are. So somehow or another, it's basically a collection of 26 courtroom sketches from the trial that ensued, upon which 26 usual suspects or unusual suspects, as it were brought to trial. But evidence points to only three goblins who were actually guilty of the crime, and three goblins were co conspirators in the murder of the Goblin King. And so there is a puzzle inside the book which helps you decipher the mystery and try to figure out which three goblins out of the 26 are actually the guilty party.
Yes, and my absolute favorite part of this is that once you do decipher the puzzle and you have your answer, we have a page on the website. I believe it's right there on your books page, actually,
Yes.
where you put in the answer and as a password to this,
Mm-hmm.
locked page, and you can get the entire crime report, which is
Yes.
amazing.
Yeah.
It's the details behind what actually went down.
It's the details. Once you know who did it,
Hmm.
it's sort of a little bit of extra information about how and why. Yeah. And working with Bandersnatch is it was great. It was a delight. And after having self-published a few books, it was really nice to work with all of you because it kind of feels more like a team putting it together and it takes some of the pressure off for some of the
Yeah.
things that you normally would do as a self-publisher. I had you guys to kind of pitch in and help and be a part of it. So that was a nice break from doing everything on my own.
Yeah, and you were really great to work with too because your manuscript and your art was already in great shape. So it wasn't hard to work with you at all. There wasn't like all this, editing that needed to be done. It was
Right.
it already came as a polished package, which we appreciate.
Well,
Yeah.
I
Mhm.
live to serve.
Yes.
hmm
So, Ken, what are you passionate about right now and what are you learning?
Oh, wow. Okay. So I'm always passionate about my three biggest loves in the world, which are books, movies, and music. So always discovering new music that I love, new movies that I fall in love with and get obsessed with. And I go to two libraries every week, check out children's books, and gush out over the ones that I enjoy the most.
I love that. That
Yeah.
would be a really great way to spend my time. And I think sometimes I've seen you share that on social media before, where you take photos of some of the books and illustrations and talk about them.
Yeah, yeah. I have a Substack called In and Out of Weeks, which if that sounds familiar, it's a nod to Where the Wild Things Are, which is my favorite picture book of all time.
Yes.
So that's where I sort of geek out over movies, music, and children's books that I like. And yeah, I do post about them online. And I'm always learning. I don't really know. That's a good question. I guess I'm always learning that there's so many artists out there, and it's always good to just sort of discover new people. And I think everything that you see and every sort of story that you hear, kind of, it absorbs itself into your consciousness and
Mhm.
into your brain, and you never really know how it's going to come out in the kind of work that you do or the conversations that you have. So that's always a neat thing to learn about and kind of see how those things come together. It's always fascinating.
Yeah, I think there's kind of a lot of pressure behind that word learning. So when you're like, so what are you learning? It makes it sound
Yeah.
like you're literally studying something and like trying to commit it to memory. But a better word might be, what are you observing? Right? Because the things that we
Yeah.
observe do
What are you
become part
observing?
of our consciousness. And then, like the Austin Kleon thing, still like an artist, those things are buried in our consciousness and we pull them out later and incorporate them into our own work.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm always very conscious of trying to find, I think another thing that I sort of observe and try to learn is how to kind of balance the consumption of stuff that you love, and then but making sure you have time to create something as well. So it's finding that balance between that and of course just the day in and day out of things. That's partly why I named my Substack In and Out of Weeks, because it's sort of in and out of weeks as I have my day job and friends and family and responsibilities and activities and things that I do. I still manage to find the time to expose myself to art that I love. But the other trick to that is, how do you work in creating your own stuff whenever inspiration hits you? And I think there's certain times when you have to kind of go in a bit of a dry spell of creating things and just kind of let things soak and marinate. And then when you finally do get the chance to sit down and write or draw something for your own enjoyment or for a project that you want to make, then it all just kind of comes tumbling out, which has been my experience.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. And another thing I've heard a lot being a writer is the best writers are readers, right? Like
Yes.
if you're a big reader, you kind of naturally become a good writer because you've absorbed that. And then you can turn around and pull from that well to create something for other people.
Yeah.
So speaking of work and your work, I've got to say, I've never been a fan of creepy stuff, scary stuff, but there is something different about your illustrations. It's a whimsical spookiness. And
Ah,
I'd love to
yes.
hear you talk about that because you pull that off well. Like I don't see like when I see your things, I'm like, this is very cool. Like this, I love this. So what is it about your art that captures that something else that makes it appealing?
Well, thank you. I'm glad to hear that. I don't know what that is. I think it's the stuff I've always been kind of drawn to. I mean, my main influences, range from, Maurice Sendak, who was very good at creating characters that are kind of menacing and a little bit scary, but also very appealing. And of course, Jim Henson and the Muppets and certain Disney films that I grew up with. I just think that there's something attractive about. I've done author visits with, reading my books in classrooms, and I find that, like some of the poems that I've written in my other books, sometimes I would think to myself, okay, do I want to even let the kids know that this one's in there? Because I don't want to scare them, but they always find them. They always find out that there's a creepy poem in there about a monster, and that's the one that they always want to hear. I think there's just something cathartic in looking at an image and being kind of afraid of it, but you never really forget it. And there's also something cathartic about coming out on the other side and knowing that that image or that thing is not going to hurt you. I think a lot of my work is kind of informed by the Chesterton quote where he says something to the effect of kids already know that dragons exist, but the best fairy tales are the ones that tell them that dragons can be beaten. There are hurtful, harmful things that are out there that can hurt you and that should be talked about. But the other reason why they should be talked about is because and should not shied away from is because kids need to understand that the stakes are real and they have to kind of know who they're safe with, and they need to know how to find that power within themselves to stand up for themselves, stand up for their dignity, stand up for and to be brave, and to know that it's always going to be. That's why children's books are always really best read or best introduced to kids before they can read on their own, in the lap of a mom or a dad or an older brother or sister, because it's sort of like it's a safe place to explore that territory and look back at those dragons. I was thinking actually earlier today about how even Goblabet, it's kind of a good exercise to kind of turn it into a game and a puzzle, because it kind of, one of the things about childhood is you have to kind of know who the bad guys are. You have to know who to trust. You have to learn which bullies on the playground you have to kind of avoid until they come to their senses. And so that's kind of a lot of the where my head goes in terms of navigating that territory and thinking about it. So yeah, I think that that's healthy for kids to be scared and to know how to deal with it.
So I am happy that you brought that up on your own, because I was going to ask you how we can see this type of art through the lens of our faith.
Mm-hmm.
And you basically answered that question without me asking it.
Okay.
Um, I write mysteries. Now, no one dies in my mysteries because they're for children. They're like the first step of mystery, very
Yeah.
like just who done it kind of stuff. And so one of the articles that I wrote for our Substack was about mysteries and how, you start off with a world in disorder, right? Like something bad has happened, someone was murdered or something occurred that has made things not right with the world. And there is usually a character who's putting the pieces back together, who's solving the mystery, who makes sure in the end, like the bad guy doesn't win, right? Like that
Mm-hmm.
person is brought to justice and that things are put right again. And so that does reflect our hope in Jesus Christ, in that even though there's a lot of bad stuff that's going on even in our real life, and kids are not oblivious to that. They know like there
Mm-hmm.
are bad things, that we have that hope that that's not the way it's meant to be and that's not the way it always will be.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not the end of the story. There's
Right.
more to the story.
So we haven't really, learned much about you and your background. So could you give us just a brief overview of all the things?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Well, I grew up in Grosse Pointe, Michigan, which is a suburb of Detroit, and as a child, just always loved music, movies, and books, and just kind of grew up soaking up all this pop culture stuff. I was a bit of a nerd growing up, and I still am, I think. And so I kind of discovered animation while I was at college and kind of was very involved as an animator for many years. So I've worked on a lot of short films through a friend of mine who runs a studio called Big Fott Studios, because his last name is Galen. His last name is Fott. His name's Galen Fott. So his studio is called Big Fott Studios. And he's directed a lot of short films for Weston Woods and Scholastic. And that's a studio that's turned children's books and adapted them into short films. So even when I was really heavy into the animation world, children's books were always kind of a big part of that. So I've transitioned more these days into the writing and illustrating of books. I've kind of come around full circle I did that a lot when I was a kid. And then I kind of added my love for storytelling in book form and kind of meshed that in with my love for film, and have been involved in animation for a long time. And I've taught animation at a few different colleges for grown-ups, but I also teach drawing classes now for kids. And that's something that I'm very passionate about, teaching them how to draw characters and how to draw still life and how to observe what they see and get it down on paper, and all those sort of art fundamentals that I learned from a local artist in Detroit. And so I'm kind of taking those things that I learned at that age, which I still think about when I'm creating stuff, and I'm trying to just share that with kids in my own neighborhood. So that's kind of what I've done, what I do, and kind of how I roll. And that's the things that are in my wheelhouse.
Yeah, I love that you are also teaching kids. I actually did not know that. I knew you had taught adults, college, and I believe, didn't you write some textbooks?
Yeah, in a former life, I did write a couple textbooks about stop motion
Yeah.
animation, which I was very into for a long time. And that's where you have a clay puppet or a puppet that has wires inside so that you can bend it into positions. And so movies like Wallace and Gromit and the original King Kong, going all the way back to the 30s and things like that. Every now and again, you see a stop motion film that's made today. It's still very much a relevant art form. So yeah, I wrote a couple books about how that's done and how to move puppets around.
That's cool. We've definitely done some stop motion studio stuff at my house. So,
Yeah, it's so accessible now. It's pretty
yeah.
easy to do. I wish I had those tools when I was a kid, just to shoot it with your phone or a digital camera. So
Yeah. So I love the fact that you're working with kids and you're kind of like passing this on to the next generation already because you know how, working with kids, you just see a lot of like fun and playfulness. They're not quite as serious as adults quite yet, and they have a lot of good ideas, right? And they have that delight that sometimes we don't see in adults who become maybe a little uptight about what they're working on. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about delight, and then
mhm.
how that delight can be sort of a protest against darkness, whatever that might be, hard times in your life or etc.
Yeah, I love the word delight. I like that you picked that because I think that that is, I mean, obviously you feel most at peace and joyful when you're doing something you enjoy. And that could even just be having a good cup of coffee or a good cup of tea with a friend, right? Like, so, I mean, anything that gives you delight, that in itself is going to be a protest against the darkness or any kind of difficulty that you might be going through, or headlines or current events, or family troubles or whatever. And that's the magic of art and of books in particular, is because you get to kind of pick up this little tome, this little pile of paper that's all bounded together and literally just escape into another world. And for a lot of kids, that can be an escape, like a literal escape from really really hard things that they might be going through. So I also think laughter is important. One of my heroes is Stephen Colbert, and he said something to the effect of that you can never be, it's impossible to be afraid if you're laughing. And that's really the best way to combat. I mean, they say that like the one thing that evil can't stand is being laughed at, being mocked, being made fun of. It's kind of a neat contradiction of things. But I think that is sort of the topsy-turvy way that our universe works. I think that that's just something that's woven into the universe, just that whimsical spookiness that kind of combats the spookiness that's more nihilistic and vicious. All that stuff is how you kind of make those things shrink, make those powers shrink.
Yeah, I know somebody who will watch scary movies, which once again, I will not watch scary movies ever. But this person, they said, I do have like a certain standards with my scary movies. There are certain things that are just bad, and we don't
Mm-hmm.
need to like consume those things. And so, like, there's a line there, like, this is bad. I'm not going to consume it. And then there are other types that, for this person, they feel does that like mocking of evil thing. It's not to be spooky. It's almost that mocking of death to say, okay, well, you've won right now, but this isn't going to last. And so that's how this other person I know views watching some of these movies that some people would find a little scary and creepy, but
Sure.
they're like, no, this is something that I can say, there's no power in this actually.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I love horror movies personally. I obviously didn't love them when I was a kid. I was scared of them, but at the same time, I was fascinated by the images I would see in the newspaper for movies that were too scary for me to see. I wouldn't watch
Right.
them, but I was still really somehow drawn to those images at the same time, and it wasn't until I was older that I got to appreciate it as an art form. But the kind of scary stories, whether it's a scary, I've actually read a few graphic novels that gave me the shivers as well because of their images and stuff. But the kind of stuff like that I enjoy is the stuff that's actually about something and that's actually truthful about the dark powers of the world. But even if in the story it's not, even if it's not defeated, it's at least honest and truthful. It says like, without the light, this is how bad things really get. So it's kind of good to have that as a wake up call every now and again, and kind of be
Hmm.
like, oh yeah, that's really not that. This is how things will go if we don't, if we're not paying attention. So I think that the ones I sort of have my line that I'll draw. I'm not into most slasher movies. I'm not really into that, but I do like a good ghost story, and I do like a good spooky story.
Yeah, that there's a usually a personal line there that you can draw and say, no, this goes too far. This is not something that is edifying to me. But
Mm-hmm.
but then, like you said, there are aspects of it where we like, no, actually there are really bad things in this world, and that is a true fact, right? Like, you
Right,
know,
exactly. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, and we're told to think of things that are true, and
right.
we're also told that instead of like we're told not to have anything to do with darkness, but the other side of that is to instead expose it, show
Hmm,
it for what it is, expose
right.
it. And so I think that the best scary movies or scary books or scary stories are the ones that actually expose it rather than
They don't
condone it.
celebrate it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's sort of asking yourself what's being celebrated, what's being embraced in this story. Is it exposing darkness for what it is, and then kind of exposing the folly of it
Hmm.
and showing the consequences? That is a healthy thing, because if we don't learn that in stories, I mean, that's the purpose of all art and all storytelling is practice for real things and real people that you're going to encounter in the world, and how do you respond to it.
Exactly. So we're going to talk about the new EP that your friend released
Oh yeah.
that where he took your poems and turned them into songs. So I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about that and how putting your work out in the world can lead to collaborations or adaptations by other artists.
Yeah, absolutely. So in 2018, I finally published, after about 7 years of actually, rewriting and rewriting and drawing and redrawing these funny little pictures that I was making and these poems that I was writing. Self-published my first poetry book, Gnomes of the Cheese Forest, and other poems. And my friend Dave Robinson, who I've known for a couple of decades, I've always admired his voice, the sound of his voice, his singing voice, and he's always been trying to write his own songs and things. And so I put this book out, I published this book, and he was really captivated by it. And he just said, I'd really love to take these and like actually turn them into songs. And I'm just like, sure, go ahead. Like, I'd love to hear what you do with it. And it took him a long time as well, probably about like another 7 years for him to finally get all of this stuff together, balancing it with life and family and everything else, and just sort of that whole creative process of, working on something and then kind of leaving it alone for a while, coming back to it with fresh eyes. And that's really how the creative process, that's how it was for my book as well. So, the book took a long time, the EP took a long time, but he would send me demo recordings every now and again. So, hey, I recorded a new thing, and I would give him little suggestions here and there, but I really just kind of trusted him with it. I didn't really direct him. I just said, "Hey, whichever poems you like that you think work, that would work as a song." I would just, I was really enchanted by the whole process, and I'm really proud of him for getting it out there. And it's also just a lot of fun to see how your own work gets sort of interpreted and enhanced and turned into something with somebody else's talents. I think that that's just awesome. I love it. And so I hope people listen to it and maybe listen to it with the book in front of them. And
Yeah, I absolutely love that.
absolutely, yeah. Yeah, it's fun. Yeah, I'm delighted by it. Let's use
There
that
you
word
go.
again.
All right, Ken. So here's the thing I've got for you. We do popcorn questions. So these are questions that you are not prepared for at all. That
Right.
means you were planning for this podcast because we know that you were laying in bed at night, thinking, what are they going to ask me? I'm going to be prepared to say all the things that you say when you're on podcasts about your work. This has nothing to do with your work. Okay.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Sure.
It
I
also
guess I
has
have to
nothing
be,
to do.
don't I?
Yeah, you do. And it has nothing to do with popcorn either. So.
Oh, darn. I like popcorn.
So the first question is, name one weird thing that is adorable.
One weird thing that is adorable. Hedgehogs.
Oh, that's so true. I love
Yeah,
hedgehogs.
because they're kind of cute, but they're also spiky.
Hmm.
And it's kind of like you might not want to touch them,
Yeah.
but you also do might want to touch them
Yes.
because they're cuddly
They are, and their little
and they look cute.
noses. They're so
Yeah, but I've
cute.
heard that they're also kind of vicious. They can be. That's
This
the
is a,
first thing that popped to mind.
well, I like that. So, fun fact that almost no one knows, because this was a very brief period of time in my life. I used to have a hedgehog as a pet.
Oh,
Mm,
nice.
he was very cute, but
Yeah,
yeah, he could poke you.
my younger brother had one too.
All right, question number two. What are some of your favorite writing tools?
Writing tools.
Mhm.
In terms of like utensils, pens and paper, or writing tools as in like techniques?
Yeah, I'll let you take that either way. It could be
Oh,
technology that you use, or it could be writing techniques. Either way.
okay. Writing tools. Well, I tried chisel and stone and it was too time consuming, so that's out. Um, I used to write, I used to do a lot more writing freehand. Like I would like my poetry books were pretty much all handwritten, but I find that I'm sort of gravitating more towards actually typing things out in the computer these days. And I don't know if that's just a phase that I'm going through or if it's just the way that I'm kind of working on things now. I think it's because when you're typing it out, you kind of feel like this is what the actual product is going to look like when it's finally there. So it kind of feels more real. And I guess it's because I'm trying to write a novel and because it's such a huge, gargantuan, daunting task. I find that actually typing it out is somehow I've gravitated towards that as an easier way to write. As far as writing technique, I don't really have any technique other than I just try to write whenever I feel inspired to write something and whenever I find the time.
Yeah,
Yeah, it
right.
goes through seasons. I like the fact that there's not one school of thought either for how to write because everybody comes at it differently. Everybody will have different ways of doing it because everybody is so unique. I mean, there's nobody in the world that can write the story that you can write. So even if it's a story that's been told before, I like that advice as well. That, it's like, yeah, this story's been told before, but not by you. So
Yeah.
I think that's important stuff to keep in mind.
Yes, that is very true. Okay, and here's the last question. It's a little silly.
Okay.
What's the most suspicious snack you've ever encountered?
Suspicious snack. Ooh, I like the alliteration behind that. Suspicious. There's even S's in the word suspicious that are buried in there.
That's right.
Chocolate covered crickets, I've heard, are a thing.
Yes, they are.
In some, it's a delicacy in some part of the world. I read about that in a book when I was a kid, that there is such a thing as chocolate covered crickets. And I don't know how I feel about that. I don't really know. I've never tried one. I don't know how it would go down. I don't know how it would taste. I don't know if I want to find out, but
I'm with you. I don't want to find
yeah.
out, but I have seen them. I've seen them.
Really? Oh, okay.
Yes.
Yeah. I trust that they do exist,
Yeah,
but
they
I don't
do.
know. I don't know if I would go there.
I would not, and I love chocolate,
I'm all
but
over chocolate. Crickets? I don't know. Not so much.
that's a very suspicious
I
snack.
love hearing crickets at night, but I don't know that I'd want to digest one.
Yeah, no, definitely not. All right, well, before we say goodbye, I wanted to be sure to tell you, well, not you personally, Ken, you, our listeners, because you already know about this, Ken,
Mhm.
about our next big project. We recently completed the Kickstarter for a poetry collection full of fun, whimsy, and heart. And in fact, Ken has poetry in the
Mhm.
book, right?
I do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very, very excited to be in such great company with so many wonderful writers.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I've got a bad case of poetry is the name of the book. It's a children's poetry anthology, and it brings together the delight of words, rhythm, rhyme, and images to instill a love of poetry in kids. With 170 poems from over 60 poets, this anthology features the exceptional art of Emily J. Person in over 100 fully illustrated pages. Edited by lover of words, our own poet, Rachel S. Donahue, I've Got a Bad Case of Poetry is destined to find its place among the classics of its genre, poetry to delight a new generation of children. Although the Kickstarter has ended, you can still participate by pre-ordering the book as a late backer through the Kickstarter page. We'll drop the link in the show notes. Thanks for joining us, Ken.
Thanks for having me.
May you find bookish treasures in your wanderings off the beaten path. Thanks for listening in to our conversation today on the Vanderpod. We hope you'll check out our full catalog at bandersnatchbooks.com. The Vanderpod is produced by Rachel S. Donahue, A.B. Donahue, and Carolyn Claire Gibbons. Audio engineering by S.D.G. Morgan. Artwork by Evelyn Warnamundy. Many thanks to our friend Chris Slayton of Son of Laughter for our theme song, Cricket in a Jar. Find links and more in the show notes.